everyone, this is Professor Draud. I'm sending you this video because we simply do not have enough time to cover these slides in regular lab time. So what I'd like you to do is watch this video, print out your lab objectives, and follow along and take notes as you normally would during class. When you come to class, be ready to take the pre-lab quiz and get ready to use those compound microscopes to look at different examples of tissues on slides. Okay, so I'm not going to delay any further. Let's get started. All right, so slide number 1 is learning objective 1, where we are supposed to associate terms with definitions. And the 3 terms listed are tissue, organ, and histology. Tissue, if you remember from lecture, tissues are groups of similar cells that have similar structure, and they function together as a unit to do a very specific thing. Okay, and we've talked about all types of different tissues, and we'll talk more about 4 broad categories of tissues today. Organs are collections of 2 or more tissues, and they structurally form a functional unit. Things like the lungs or the heart, right? Those are all organs. And histology, way back in the very beginning of this course, I said that histology is the study of microscopic anatomy. Right? It's the study of tissues, study of cells, and how those tissues are arranged into organs. So this is microscopic anatomy. So if we move along to learning objective 2, and we talked about the 4 types of human tissue, there are 4 broad categories: epithelial, connective, nervous, and muscular. And so let's start with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissues are widespread throughout the body. They basically form the covering of all of the body's surfaces, both the internal and external. They line the cavities inside your body and the cavities of hollow organs. Epithelial tissue is also the major tissue that you'll find in glands. Now, epithelial tissue performs a variety of functions: protection, secretion, absorption, excretion, filtration, diffusion, sensory reception, a whole bunch of stuff. Connective tissue is next. Connective tissue supports, protects, and gives structure to other tissues and organs in the body. Connective tissue is made up of cells, fibers, and this gel-like substance that we'll talk about later. Some types of connective tissue include bone, cartilage, fat, blood, and lymphatic tissue. The next tissue is nervous tissue. And nervous tissue is really important. It's found in the brain, the spinal cord, and nerves. It's responsible for coordinating and controlling your body activities. It's how you figure out that what you've just touched is hot, and you can then remove your hand from that hot object, right? The cells in nervous tissue that generate and conduct those nerve impulses are called neurons, or simply nerve cells. And they have a very typical structure to them with 3 principal body parts: the dendrites here that receive signals, the cell body, and then the axon, which sort of acts as a wire that sends those signals down out through the axon terminals, potentially to another neuron or to some sort of effector. The next tissue is muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is composed of cells that have a very special ability to shorten or contract, and this can produce movement of the body parts. Muscle tissue is also highly vascular, meaning that it has a lot of blood vessels. Some different types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. Some of these you are able to move through thinking about them, and others are moving without you having to think about them. But we'll get more into that in a little bit. Now let's talk about the more general characteristics and structures associated with each of these tissue types. Okay, so there's a lot of information here, but feel free to pause the video at any moment to take your notes. So some general characteristics about epithelial tissue. These are sheets of very closely adhering cells that could be one or a few cells thick. They cover the body surfaces, both inner and outer, and cavities of hollow organs. The upper surface is usually exposed to the environment or some sort of internal space in the body, and they constitute most glands. This is all stuff we said in the previous slide. Epithelial tissue is avascular, meaning it does not have blood vessels. It usually gets nourished by the underlying connective tissue that it is laying on. Again, some functions: it protects deeper tissues from injury and infection, produces and releases chemical secretions, it gets rid of waste, and it absorbs chemicals, including nutrients. It can selectively filter substances, and it can also help in sensation of the environment. Epithelial cells are often found very close together. They have a very high mitotic rate, meaning they go through cell division a lot. And they have what is called a basement membrane, also called a basal lamina, which is the layer between an epithelium and the underlying connective tissue. The basal lamina is a sheet of proteins and other substances, collagen and things of that nature, that anchors the epithelium to the connective tissue below it. There are two surfaces of the cell when you think about this. There is something called the basal surface, which is the surface of the cell that faces towards the basement membrane, and the apical surface, the surface of the cell that faces away from the basement membrane. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So if we talk about simple epithelia, that means that we are talking about a tissue that contains only one layer of cells. And then it'll be simple blank epithelia. Well, you'll find they'll be named by the shape of the cells. All of these cells touch a basement membrane, and here it is, the basal lamina. So this is the basal side, and this is the apical side. Same here, except we're talking about stratified epithelial. Stratified means that there's more than one layer. It is stratified, right? If you looked at the side of a cliff, you might see strata in the rocks, just layers of rocks. Okay, the first we'll talk about are the simple epithelial cells, epithelial tissues. And there are four types that have only one layer, meaning they are simple. Simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, and something called pseudostratified columnar. Okay, the first is simple squamous. They are thin, scaly cells. Here's what they look like, thin and scaly. Simple cuboidal are square or round cells. And simple columnar are columns, tall and narrow. And then the fourth one is a pseudostratified columnar. Pseudo means seemingly stratified or almost stratified, but fake. Sometimes I think about it. They look to be stratified, meaning they look to be more than one layer. But if you look closely, all of the cells attach to the basement membrane. See that? So they seem to be or appear to be stratified, but they are actually not. And they are just simple, single layers of cells, but they are also columnar. Another thing that you'll find in simple columnar or pseudostratified columnar are cells called goblet cells, if you see here. And goblet cells are these wine glass shaped, kind of looks like a wine glass, right? Or goblet shaped, if you know what a goblet looks like. And they are mucus secreting cells that you'll find often in simple columnar or pseudostratified epithelia. Okay, let's move along and talk about simple squamous epithelium and see a picture of what they look like on a slide. So they are simple, so they have a single row of thin cells, and this permits rapid diffusion and transport of substances. And what you'll also find is that you'll secrete serous fluid here. Locations here, alveoli, that's what transfers oxygen from in your lungs. Glomeruli, endothelium, and serosa. Next, simple cuboidal epithelium. You could see the round-looking shapes here, but it is a single layer, so it is simple. Some things here, absorption, secretion, mucus production, and movement. Locations, liver, thyroid, mammary, and salivary glands, bronchioles, and kidney tubules. Very, basic and shaped, pretty easy to recognize, simple cuboidal. Okay, simple columnar. These are, again, simple, one layer, tall, narrow cells. They have oval nuclei in the basal half. So the nuclei are all lined up towards the basal lamina, the basal side of the cell. Here you'll find this type of tissue in the brush border of the microvilli. They're sometimes ciliated, meaning they have these cilia on top, these hair-like structures. And some of them may possess goblet cells. There are those goblet cells again. What these are good at, absorption and secretion, and also secretion of mucus. Goblet cells, right? You'll find these in the lining of the gastrointestinal tract, uterus, kidney, and also in the uterine tubes. Last, pseudostratified epithelium, again, looks to be multi-layered, right? This is, you could be forgiven if you thought, oh, that's probably multi-layered, but no, each of these cells actually won't be attached to the basal lamina. There are nuclei at several layers, however, so that's why you might think that this is stratified. But it has cilia, it has goblet cells, and it secretes that mucus just the same. Locations you'll find these, respiratory tract, and portions of the male urethra. Okay, stratified epithelia, meaning more than one layer, either 2 to sometimes up to 20 layers of cells. Some cells will rest directly on others, and only the deepest layer will attach to the basal lamina. There are 3 stratified epithelia that get named for the shapes of their apical surface cells, not the basal, the apical. Stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and also stratified columnar, although that's quite rare. And there's also a 4th type called transitional epithelium that we'll talk about. So here is non-keratinized or keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. It's the same as keratinized, meaning having a bunch of keratin within it, without the surface layer of dead cells, like, your skin. It resists abrasion and penetration of pathogens, and the locations you find these are the tongue, the oral mucosa, the esophagus, and the vagina. Okay, stratified cuboidal epithelium. Once again, remember, this is named for the apical layer are going to look cuboidal. 2 or more cell layers, of course, because they're stratified, and the surface cells are square or round. It secretes sweat, produces sperm, produces the ovarian hormones, so likely you'll find them in the sweat gland ducts, the ovarian follicles, and the seminiferous tubules. Transitional epithelium is this last one that we'll talk about. It's a multi-layered epithelium, obviously, with surface cells that change from round to flat when stretched, so they can actually transition or change as they move. This allows for filling of the urinary tract, and so obviously the locations that you'll find them are in the ureter and the bladder. Okay, that was epithelial, and let's talk about connective tissue. Connective tissue is a diverse, abundant type of tissue in which typically there are relatively few cells that are embedded in that gel-like matrix. And obviously, in the matrix, there's some other stuff in there, but the main thing is collagen. Most of the cells will not be in direct contact with each other. Connective tissue supports, connects, and protects organs. And it's highly variable in terms of vascularity. It means some of them could be very, very vascular, which is the loose connective tissue, and then some of it could have few or no blood vessels like cartilage. Functions of connective tissues: connecting organs like tendons and ligaments, support with your bones and your cartilage, physical protection like your skull, the cranium, your ribs, or your sternum, immune protection, your white blood cells, which attack foreign invaders in your blood, movement, bones provide a lever system for movement, storage, fat, calcium, phosphorus, heat production, metabolizing brown fat in infants produces heat, and transport of materials in the blood. Okay, let's talk about some fibrous connective tissue first. Fibers of fibrous connective tissue, there are 3 types: Collagenous fibers, meaning collagen. It's the most abundant of the body's protein. About 25% of all of the protein produced in the body is collagen. Collagen is tough, flexible, and stretch resistant. Some things that are very collagenous: tendons, ligaments, the deepest layer of the skin. All of that is mostly collagen. It's less visible in the matrix of cartilage and bone. Reticular fibers. They're the very thin collagen fibers that are coated with glycoprotein. Remember, glycoproteins are just proteins that have sugars on their surfaces. They form the framework of the spleen and the lymph nodes. And the last one are the elastic fibers. They're very thin, more thin than collagenous fibers. And they branch and rejoin each other. And they're made of a protein called elastin. And surprisingly or not surprisingly, they allow for stretch and recoil. So things that are elastic, like your ears are pretty elastic, right? That's one example. Types of fibrous connective tissue. We have loose connective tissue, which is a gel-like, you'll find a gel-like ground substance between the cells. And there are two types, areolar and reticular, and then dense connective tissue, where fibers fill spaces between the cells instead of that gel-like substance. And the types vary in their fiber orientation, either dense regular or dense irregular. Okay, we'll talk about all of these now. Here's what areolar tissue looks like. These loosely organized fibers, a lot of blood vessels in this tissue. And this is what you'll find underlying the epithelia and serous membranes, between muscles, and then the passageways for nerves and blood vessels is areolar tissue. Reticular tissue is a mesh of reticular fibers and fibroblasts, and it forms the supportive stroma, or basically the framework, for the lymphatic organs. So you'll find them in the lymph nodes, the spleen, the thymus, and the bone marrow. Here's that dense, regular connective tissue, where you find these densely packed parallel collagen fibers. You can see how they're parallel to each other. This elastic tissue forms wavy sheets in some locations, tendons that attach muscles to bones, and ligaments that hold the bones together. That's where you'll find dense, regular connective tissue. And then dense, irregular connective tissue shows those densely packed, randomly arranged collagen fibers in just this random arrangement. And there are few visible cells here, and this withstands unpredictable stress. So you'll see this in things like the deeper layers of the skin, capsules around organs that can sort of take a beating and just stand tight and packed. So there we go. And adipose tissue is fat. Adipose tissue is a tissue in which there are cells called adipocytes, which are the dominant cell type. The space between adipocytes is occupied by that areolar tissue, highly vascular, also reticular tissue, and blood capillaries. Now, fat, of course, is the body's primary energy store, and fat gets recycled continuously. New triglycerides get synthesized while you eat, and then old molecules are always hydrolyzed and released into the blood for building of new molecules. That's fat. Here's what fat looks like. A lot of empty-looking cells, but within those adipocytes is the stored fat. There are very thin margins, and the nucleus is pressed all the way up against the cell membrane. Pretty cool. Again, energy storage, insulation, cushioning, subcutaneous fat below the skin, and organ packing. And then brown fat allows for young children to produce heat. Okay, cartilage. Cartilage is that stiff connective tissue that has that flexible matrix. It is avascular, meaning no blood vessels here. It gives shape to the ear, the tip of the nose, the larynx. There's a few different things you'll need to know here. Chondroblasts are cartilage cells that produce the matrix that will entrap them. Chondrocytes are cartilage cells that are trapped in the lacunae or the cavities. And the perichondrium is the sheath of dense, irregular connective tissue that surrounds elastic and most hyaline cartilage, but not articular cartilage. It contains a reserve population of the chondroblasts, and that contributes to cartilage growth throughout your life. Yes, things that are made of cartilage continue to grow out throughout your life, like your ears and things like that. The three types of cartilage are hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is clear and has a glassy appearance because of how fine the collagen fibers are. What you'll find is that this eases joint movement, holds the airways open, as you can see here. It moves the vocal cords so you can talk, and allows for the growth of the young juvenile long bones. The locations: articular cartilage, costal cartilage, the trachea and the larynx, and the fetal skeleton. Elastic cartilage contains, well, you guessed it, a lot of elastic fibers. It's covered with that perichondrium, and it provides flexible elastic support. The locations are the external ear and the epiglottis. Fibrocartilage is cartilage that contains large, coarse bundles of collagen fibers. What happens here is you see in the vertebral, intervertebral discs here, this resists compression, and it kind of works like shocks in a car. It absorbs shocks, a shock. So locations for this: pubic symphysis, menisci, and the intervertebral discs. Okay, bone, another part of connective tissue. You might not have thought about it, but bone is a tissue made of calcified connective tissue. Bones are actually organs that are made up of bone tissue, cartilage, marrow, and other tissue types. And there's two forms of osseous or bone tissue: spongy bone and compact bone. Spongy bone has a porous appearance, like a sponge, right? SpongeBob is absorbent, yellow, and porous, right? Meaning it has holes in it. There are some delicate struts of the bone called trabeculae, and it's covered by compact bone. You'll find these in the heads of long bones and in the middle of flat bones like the sternum. The compact bone is denser, it's calcified, has no visible spaces, it has a more complex arrangement, and the cells and the matrix surround vertically oriented blood vessels so that blood can travel through them. Here's what compact bone looks like. It's arranged in cylinders, you can see. It surrounds central canals that run longitudinally through the shafts of long bones. Here's what that looks like right there. Blood vessels and nerves are able to travel through those central canals, and the bone matrix gets deposited in concentric lamellae, onion-like layers that are found in each central canal. All right. Compact bone, again, there are some different terms here. The osteon is the central canal and its surrounding lamellae. The osteocytes are mature bone cells within the lacunae. Okay, the canaliculi are delicate canals radiating from each lacunae. So right here. And those follow to the neighbors and allow the osteocytes to contact each other. And the periosteum are tough fibrous connective tissue that's covering the entire bone. All right, blood is a fluid connective tissue. Blood transports cells and the materials within them from place to place. Plasma is blood's ground substance, what's blood's hanging out in. The formed elements, which are cells and cell fragments, the erythrocytes, or the red blood cells, which transport oxygen and carbon dioxide, and the leukocytes, your white blood cells, which help to defend you against infection and disease. Some other things in blood: neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, and platelets, which are fragments of cells that are involved in clotting, blood clots, right? Here's what a blood smear looks like on a slide. There are some platelets. Here are the neutrophils. Here is a lymphocyte. And all of the red blood cells are your erythrocytes. Okay. The nervous and the muscular tissues are excitable. And excitability is the ability to respond to a stimulus by changing membrane potential. This is developed to the highest degree in the nervous and the muscular tissues. Membrane potential is the difference in electrical charge or voltage that could occur across a membrane. In nerve cells, when there's a change in voltage, it results in rapid transmission of a signal from one cell to another. And in muscle cells, a change in voltage will result in contraction or shortening of the cell. Nervous tissue, again, specialized for communication by electrical and chemical signals. It consists of the neurons, which are the nerve cells. They're able to detect stimuli, respond to them quickly, and then transmit the coded information rapidly to other cells so that some sort of effect can take place. The neuroglia, or sometimes called the glial cells, are these little guys right here. They protect and they assist neurons. They're called the housekeepers of the nervous system, and they're actually more numerous than the actual neurons themselves. Okay, more about the nervous tissue. Some parts of the neuron, the neurosoma, sometimes just called the soma or the cell body, houses the nucleus and other organelles, and it controls protein synthesis with the ribosomes. The dendrites out here are multiple short branch, what are called processes, just little short branches that help to pick up signals from other cells and then transmit messages to the neurosoma and then down the axon or the nerve fiber. It sends those signals to other cells and can actually be more than a meter long. It's really, really impressive. Muscular tissue. Muscular tissue is coming up to the end here, so I know this is a very fast-paced video, but muscular tissue is comprised of elongated cells that are specialized to be excitable, and when they are excitable and they are excited, they contract in response to that stimulation. Their primary job is to exert physical force on other tissues and organs. Right? They create movement involved in movement of the body, movement of the limbs, digestion, waste elimination, breathing, speech like I'm doing now, and also circulating the blood. And it's also an important source of producing body heat, right? This is all due to muscle tissue. 3 types of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth will be our last 3 slides. Skeletal muscle is very easy to see under a microscope because it's made of these muscle fibers, which are very long, thin cells, and they are multinucleate, right? They are multinucleate, meaning they have many nuclei within the same cell. Okay, this is the muscle fiber, the entire muscle fiber here, and they are striated, right? You can see boom, 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 striations, alternating with dark and light bands. Really interesting to see the striations. This is voluntary muscle, meaning that there is conscious control over the skeletal muscles, right? When you want to extend your arm, you think about it and you can control it. Cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is also striated, by the way, you can see here, right, down the lines, just like the skeletal muscle. But cardiac muscle is just limited to the heart. Cardiomyocytes, which are just the cells of the cardiac muscle, they are branched, right? You can see that they're kind of branched here. You see that? And they are shorter, much shorter than skeletal muscle fibers. They contain only one centrally located nucleus instead of being multinucleate. And they have these things called intercalated discs that join those cardiomyocytes together. This provides an electrical and mechanical connection so that all of these cells can be synchronized because you want the heart to pump in unison. These are involuntary. Luckily, you do not have to focus on your heart beating. It just happens, right? And last, but not least, I guess, is smooth muscle tissue. It's smooth because it is not striated. Most of the smooth muscle you'll find in visceral muscle that makes up parts of the walls of hollow organs. They are made of fusiform, which just means tapered at the ends. As you can see, it kind of tapers off at both ends. Fusiform myocytes, lacking striations, that's why it's smooth. And the cells are short and have one central nucleus. This is, again, involuntary function here, right? A big part you'll find smooth muscle is in the stomach. You do not have to think about your stomach muscles contracting, right? The actual organ of the stomach, not the area that you might be thinking about, like your abs. No, but I mean the muscles in your organ, the stomach. Okay, so just about 30-minute video. Let me know if there's any questions before you come to lab, and I'll see you in lab.